Hi scholars, in this presentation our two main topics are measurement and replication. This presentation addresses four objectives. 1. Define behaviors, dimensions, and recording procedures. 2. Calculate inter-observer agreement, IOA, using the point-by-point agreement method. 3. Answer the questions why and how for replication. And 4. Rewrite single case research questions for systematic replication. Let's start with some examples of observable, measurable behavior. These are examples of behavior that we can count, see, hear, or repeat. There are 4 images on the slide: Count Von Count from Sesame Street, a shadowy figure holding a magnifier, an icon of a speaker sending a message to a human ear, and a curved arrow to signify repeating. Example 1 is initiate a task analysis step within 5 seconds and complete it within 15 seconds. Is this observable and measurable? Example 2. Write a 6-word sentence with correct grammar and spelling. Is this observable and measurable? Example 3. Participant who will be standing 6 feet from the item will locate the item and select it by grasping, touching, or pointing to the item within 30 seconds of the task direction. Is this observable and measurable? 6 categories represent the dimensions of behavior: count, frequency, rate, duration, latency, trials to criterion, magnitude. On the slide, 6 circles are positioned to form a larger circle. Inside each circle is the image of a single goldfish. Count, or frequency, is how many times a behavior occurs. If the number of opportunities are constant across trials, then use a number to record the count. If the number of opportunities change across trials, then record count using a percentage. Behavior should have a clear onset and offset, for example, number of words written or number of steps taken independently. Rate refers to frequency per unit of time. For example, number of words read correct per minute. Duration is the length of time it takes to complete a response, or the total amount of time that a response occurs. For example, the length of time spent putting a puzzle together. Latency is how long from a specified cue it takes for a response to occur. For example, the length of time to respond to a WH question. Trials to criterion is a measure of the number of responses or practice opportunities needed for a person to achieve a pre-established level of accuracy or proficiency or independence. This is derived from count, frequency, latency, or duration, and often used to assess skill acquisition or used to evaluate the efficiency of an intervention. Magnitude is the intensity or strength of a response. For example, the speed of a pitch, how far one kicks a ball, volume when speaking, self-injury on a trauma scale. Example 1 is initiate a task analysis step within 5 seconds and complete it within 15 seconds. We saw this example earlier, and it met criterion to be considered observable and measurable. This behavior has 2 dimensions. One is latency for initiating, and the other is duration for time it takes to complete the step. On the slide is the image of 6 fish-filled circles with a ring around the circles labeled for latency and duration. Example 2 is write a 6-word sentence with correct grammar, spelling. This was the example we saw earlier, and it indicates an observable, measurable behavior. This narrowly is a count behavior. We could say, yes, they wrote a 6-word, syntactically correct sentence once, twice, or 3 times. However, we can evaluate on the dimension of magnitude using a rubric to evaluate the degree to which the student used grammar and spelling in writing the 6-word sentence. On the slide is the image of 6 fish-filled circles with a ring around the circles labeled magnitude and count or frequency. Example 3 was participant who will be standing 6 feet from the item will locate the item and select it by grasping, touching, or pointing to the item within 30 seconds of the task direction. This was presented earlier as an observable, measurable behavior, and this can be measured on the dimension of latency. On the slide is the image of 6 fish-filled circles with a ring around the circle for latency. Some behaviors leave byproducts that can be examined later. Permanent product recording allows you to do just that. For example, you might be interested in the number of vocational tasks a person completes, the number of worksheet problems completed correctly, the cleanliness of a room once students leave, the appropriateness of a student's dress or appearance for their work setting, the number of objects a particular student has damaged or interacted with. The disadvantage of this approach of permanent product recording is that it can only be used with those behaviors that produce a tangible byproduct. It provides you with little information about the process by which the byproduct was produced. When behaviors do not produce a tangible byproduct, we can use direct observation in several ways. Event recording, interval recording, which could be partial or whole interval recording, time sampling, latency recording, and duration recording. Event recording is used to capture the behavioral dimensions of frequency and rate. You simply tally or count the number of times the targeted behaviors occur. It is probably the most commonly used recording system because it's fairly easy to use, straightforward to interpret, and produces data that can be easily graphed. It's relevant to many of the behaviors that educators and clinicians are interested in. On the next few slides, I will show you some data sheets that allow you to use event recording. Here's an event recording sheet for a fictitious student named Emily Raptor, who's working at a department store as part of her job training. The job coach is tallying the number of times Emily greets customers, asks for assistance, provides assistance, and folds clothing. Each is counted by time block, so the job coach can see how Emily paces herself throughout her shift. Event recording has some distinct advantages. The primary benefits are that it's easy to use and generally fairly accurate. It also is useful across many topographies of discrete behavior. The drawback is that you have to watch continuously or you'll miss a behavior. It also can't be used with continuous behavior, behaviors that last a sustained amount of time. Finally, when a behavior happens with a very high frequency, one's accuracy in recording that behavior can decrease substantially. Sometimes it's sufficient to approximate the actual number of times that a behavior occurs. Interval recording and time sampling make estimates of the occurrence of a behavior by dividing an observation session into discrete intervals and then recording whether a response occurs either throughout an interval, whole interval, during any point in an interval, partial interval, or during a fixed time period at the end of an interval, momentary time sampling. Such approaches allow you to record both continuous and high-frequency behaviors. I'll talk about each of these approaches separately. The advantage of whole interval recording is that it can be used to make estimates of behavior that occurs continuously. It can also be converted to a percentage. For example, 10% of intervals, or 25% of intervals, or 100% of intervals, etc., which are very interpretable. The challenges are that it tends to underestimate the overall occurrence of responding, especially when behaviors last a relatively short amount of time in relation to the interval length. If you think about it, behaviors that last just 1 second shorter than the entire interval just won't be counted. In addition, whole interval recording requires you to watch the student constantly, which requires time and undivided attention, as well as it can promote observer fatigue. The advantages of partial interval recording are that it can provide an estimate of behaviors that occur for a short period of time, as well as for high-frequency behaviors. Contrary to whole interval recording, partial interval recording tends to overestimate the occurrence of behavior. Think about it, if your interval lasts 30 seconds, a brief 1 second occurrence of the behavior would cause you to count the entire interval. The larger the interval, the greater the overestimation. Like whole interval recording, partial interval recording also requires constant observation. The advantages of momentary time sampling are that it's very efficient because you do not have to watch people constantly. It enables you to collect data on multiple students or clients simultaneously. The drawback is that it can underestimate behavior that occurs only briefly. So, as we can see on this chart, the recording system that you use can lead you to different conclusions. Therefore, it's essential that you carefully think about which approach best reflects the behaviors and dimensions of interest. Duration recording is used when you want to measure how long a behavior lasts. Obviously, as the name suggests, duration recording is used to measure the dimension of duration. It is most appropriate for behaviors that occur infrequently but last for some length of time. On the slide is the image of an hourglass filled with sand. Next, there's latency recording, which is used to measure the dimension of latency. The advantages follow as would be expected. It provides an index of temporal relation between adjacent stimulus and responding and can be easily converted to an average latency. The disadvantages are that it requires use of a timing device and that the base rate of the antecedent event defines the amount of data that can be collected. That is, if a teacher or a practitioner only makes one request, you get only one data point for the day. Which recording system would you use for collecting baseline data to record the frequency with which a child throws objects during whole group instruction? On the side is the image of a standing child throwing an airplane. The response options are event recording, interval/duration recording, or latency recording. Which recording system would you use to track out-of-seat behavior when it's perceived as problematic and long-lasting? On the slide is the image of a red chair with a metal frame. Response options are interval/duration recording, latency recording, or event recording. Which recording system would you use for the behavior making complaining remarks? On the slide is the image of a grumpy-faced purple cartoon character, and response options are latency recording, interval/duration recording, and event recording. As single-case researchers, we strive to ensure consistency in our findings. This next section focuses on reliability. One way that we ensure consistency is by evaluating consistency and recording the target behavior, also referred to as Inter-Observer Agreement, or IOA. In single-case research, we calculate IOA for a case and report the mean and range for each case. In this example on the screen, we have Observer 1 and Observer 2 rating the occurrence and non-occurrence of a behavior in 12 intervals. On the screen, we have 7 agreements and 5 disagreements. Using point by point, we can calculate an IOA of 58%. With this data, we should revisit the behavior, ensure that it's operationally defined, and retrain the observers, because we strive for inter-observer agreement to exceed 80%. In this segment of the presentation, we'll focus and revisit what we know about replication. In single subject experimental design, the 3 main reasons that we replicate include to assess the reliability of findings, to assess the generality of findings, and to look for exceptions. Let's gain some practice with identifying intra and inter-subject replication. In an AB-AB design, we need 3 demonstrations of effect, which on the slide are circled in red. We see one effect in the condition change from A to B. This effect is replicated from B back to A. This effect is replicated again from A to B. We have 3 demonstrations. In other words, for this one participant, we see intra-subject replication, also called direct intra-participant replication. On the slide is a multiple probe across behaviors graph. We see one participant's data across 3 sets of behavior. The replications of effect are circled in red. Is this intra-subject or inter-subject replication? Well, there's only one participant, so we're replicating the effect for data within the participant's performance. It's intra-subject replication. This graph shows a multiple baseline across participants. There are 3 demonstrations of effect. The 2 replications are circled in red. Is this intra-subject replication or inter-subject replication? In the final section of this presentation, we will focus on research question rewriting. When we conduct single case research, our research questions relate to the relationship between the introduction of an intervention or treatment and change in behavior. Usually, research questions name the independent variable, dependent variable, and the expected pattern of change. The question, will a pictorial graphic organizer increase the percentage of information student can recall, is written to name the independent variable, pictorial graphic organizer, and the dependent variable, percentage of information recalled, and the expected pattern or increase in change of behavior. The researchers want to know more than this. Specifically, they want to know whether there are 3 demonstrations of effect at 3 points in time, so they can phrase the question as, is there a functional relation between the use of a pictorial graphic organizer and increased level of performance on information recall assessments? If you were going to implement a direct replication of the study with the question, will students with ID, intellectual disability, locate grocery items more efficiently with audio or picture lists? How would you write the research question using the is there a functional relation frame? Is there a functional relation between blank versus blank on the blank with which students with ID locate grocery items? If you were going to implement a systematic replication of this study with the question, will students with ID locate grocery items more efficiently with audio or picture lists? This means that you would change one or more variable. For example, maybe you'd change the setting. Instead of locating items in a grocery store, you could have students locate similar items in the context of preparing breakfast in the kitchen at school. The question could sound like, Is there a functional relation between use of audio versus picture lists on the efficiency with which students with ID locate ingredients from the kitchen to prepare breakfast at school? Reflect on what you know now in relation to the 4 objectives. Define behaviors, dimensions, and recording procedures. Calculate inter-observer agreement using the point-by-point agreement method. Answer the questions why and how for replication. Rewrite single-case research questions for systematic replication. Relish in the beauty of single-case design until we meet again.